Imagine being forced to sacrifice your very manhood, not for love, not for war, but for the chance to walk the velvet halls of power. Imagine surrendering your body to a blade so that you might enter the Forbidden City, a palace so sacred that even the emperor's own brothers were forbidden to sleep inside its walls. This wasn't a metaphor. This was the brutal reality for thousands of men throughout China's imperial history. They were castrated, physically altered, in the most violent, irreversible way to become eunuchs. Men, yet no longer men. Trusted, yet never equal. Essential, yet eternally exiled from the core of humanity, family love and legacy. This was the price of proximity to power. Behind the crimson gates and golden rooftops of the Forbidden City, a dark and tragic world unfolded, one that history often glosses over, but never forgets. These were not just servants. They were guardians of royal bloodlines, silent witnesses to imperial secrets, and administrators of the most sacred inner chambers. But at what cost? What did they lose to become so indispensable? This is the haunting story of the eunuchs of the Forbidden City, men who were everywhere in the palace, yet forever nowhere in the world. Hidden in the heart of Beijing, the Forbidden City was more than just a palace. It was a universe sealed behind blood-red walls and gilded rooftops, where time obeyed only the will of the emperor. From the outside, it radiated divine authority. Symmetrical courtyards, golden dragons carved in stone, and crimson gates that opened only for the chosen few. But inside it was a fortress of isolation, ritual, and fear. Every corner echoed with whispers of power, yet the silence was deafening. By imperial decree, no man was allowed to remain within the palace walls after sundown. Not soldiers, not ministers, not even princes of the royal blood. The only exception, the eunuchs, men stripped of their manhood, deemed safe enough to coexist with the emperor's countless concubines. This rule was enforced with chilling precision. Anyone discovered inside without permission faced immediate execution. In this sacred city, control was absolute. Every breath, every step, every glance was governed by rank and ritual. And yet behind the strict order was a profound loneliness. The Forbidden City was a sanctum of divine rule, but it was also a prison. And those who served within it, especially the eunuchs, lived suspended between honor and erasure, privilege and invisibility. Castration in Imperial China was not merely a punishment, it was a currency. A grim transaction in which flesh was traded for access, pain for position, and identity for the illusion of upward mobility. To serve in the Forbidden City, one had to be beyond temptation, beyond threat, beyond manhood. And so, the eunuch was created, a man reshaped to fit the moral and political logic of the empire. According to Confucian ideals, the emperor was the son of heaven, entrusted with the sacred duty of preserving a pure and unbroken bloodline. This meant that the women of his harem, sometimes numbering in the thousands, had to remain untouched by any other man. The solution: strip every male attendant of the ability to father children. But this wasn't simply about preventing scandal. It was about maintaining divine order. Castration became the ritual that ensured loyalty through mutilation. In the cold calculus of the court, a man who could not sire heirs was a man who posed no dynastic threat. Thus, eunuchs were seen as uniquely suited, incapable of betrayal by desire or ambition. Yet beneath this logic lay tragedy. These were men condemned to serve a lineage they could never join, guardians of life, who had been denied their own. To be a eunuch in the Forbidden City was to live a life of profound contradiction. On one hand, these men held unimaginable access, whispering directly into the emperor's ear, managing the affairs of the harem, and overseeing the most delicate operations of palace life. Yet, on the other hand, they were permanently excluded from the most fundamental experiences of humanity. They could hold the imperial seal in their hands, but never the hand of a child they called their own. They could orchestrate ceremonies for royal weddings, but never be a groom. They stood at the epicenter of power, yet lived on the outer edges of identity. This paradox defined their existence. Eunuchs were simultaneously trusted and despised, needed, and shamed. They wielded real influence, yet were denied basic dignity. Their very bodies became symbols of loyalty, proof that they had sacrificed everything for the state. But the cost was soul deep. In becoming more useful to the empire, they became less whole as men. Their lives were a balancing act between reverence and revulsion, between authority and alienation. In the Forbidden City, they were everywhere. But in the eyes of the world beyond its walls, they were ghosts present, vital, yet perpetually erased. Not all eunuchs came to the Forbidden City by choice, but many did. In a society where upward mobility was nearly impossible, for the poor castration became a grotesque gateway to power. For desperate families, it was a calculated sacrifice, mutilate the body of a son in hopes that he might one day serve in the emperor's palace, earn a salary, and send wealth home. Some boys were handed over willingly. Others were tricked, sold, or forced. The reasons varied, but the outcome was the same, a lifetime behind palace walls, bound by service and silence. Others entered not from within, but from beyond China's borders. Captives of war Mongols, Koreans, and even Southeast Asians were sometimes castrated and sent as tributes, their bodies offered as symbols of submission to the empire. A few came from noble families who believed that a eunuch's success at court could bring honor. In time, the demand for eunuchs grew so vast that private households of powerful bureaucrats and aristocrats also kept them, using them as attendants, musicians, and spies. The Forbidden City didn't just recruit eunuchs, it consumed them. They arrived as boys full of fear and hope, and they were remade not just in flesh, but in purpose, allegiance, and fate. Within the towering gates of the Forbidden City, eunuchs were far more than passive bystanders. They were the invisible hands that kept the empire running. From dawn until well past dusk, they orchestrated the rhythm of palace life, lighting lanterns, managing court documents, preparing royal meals, supervising servants, and ensuring that not a single detail fell out of line. Every gesture, every movement within the palace flowed through them like blood through veins. Without eunuchs, the Forbidden City would have stalled. Their most sacred duty was the management of the emperor's harem, a vast inner world where hundreds, sometimes thousands of concubines lived in complex hierarchy. Eunuchs oversaw everything: the allocation of food, the enforcement of rules, even the upbringing of imperial offspring. They recorded visits from the emperor, tracked pregnancies, and ensured no man entered without permission. In doing so, they protected not just the emperor's honor, but the very legitimacy of the imperial bloodline. They also held immense bureaucratic responsibilities. Many eunuchs became personal aides, court messengers, and financial managers. A select few even advised on state affairs. They were indispensable yet invisible, tasked with guarding the heart of the empire while remaining forever on its margins. The cost of serving the emperor was not just spiritual or symbolic, it was brutally physical. Castration, often performed on boys as young as 8 or 9, was a dangerous and excruciating procedure. In the absence of modern medicine, many did not survive the operation. Those who did lived with chronic pain infection and lifelong complications. Their voices changed, often high and ghost-like. Their bodies failed to mature fully. They bled in secret. And most of all, they carried invisible wounds, the trauma of being permanently severed from the path of ordinary manhood. These were not just men without genitals. They were men without futures, no wife, no children, no lineage to carry their name. In a Confucian society where honoring one's ancestors was sacred, eunuchs were seen as failures, even outcasts. They had no place at ancestral altars. They were barred from family burial grounds. Their sacrifice, however politically convenient for the empire, rendered them incomplete in the eyes of tradition. And still many endured. Stripped of the right to love, to reproduce, to be seen as whole, they poured their identity into service. They became silent sentinels of power, bearing the burden of sacrifice so that an empire might flourish in splendor. Despite their loyalty and essential roles, eunuchs were rarely respected within the rigid social hierarchy of the imperial court. To the Confucian bureaucrats and military officials, they were reminders of what was unnatural men who had been mutilated, stripped of honor, and made useful only through the loss of their masculinity. This deep-rooted prejudice followed eunuchs everywhere. They were routinely mocked, scapegoated, and publicly humiliated by officials who viewed them as morally suspect and socially inferior. Whenever a political decision backfired or an imperial policy failed, eunuchs were often the first to take the fall. Their closeness to the emperor made them easy targets. If a decree proved unpopular or a concubine fell out of favor, blame would quietly shift to the eunuch who had carried the message, arranged the meeting, or been present at the wrong moment. Verbal abuse was constant. Accusations of deceit, greed, or manipulation shadowed their every move. Physical violence was not uncommon either, especially for those who angered the wrong official or lost imperial favor. And yet they had no recourse. No family to protect them, no clan to appeal to. In a palace governed by favor and fear, eunuchs existed at the mercy of others, valued tools one day, expendable ghosts the next. Yet within this world of humiliation and sacrifice, a few eunuchs defied expectation and rose to breathtaking heights of power. These were not merely servants, they became kingmakers, spies, and shadow rulers. By mastering the delicate art of palace politics, some eunuchs gained the emperor's absolute trust, wielding influence that rivaled even the highest ministers. As intermediaries between the emperor and his officials, they controlled access information and favor three of the most powerful currencies in imperial China. Chief eunuchs in particular often oversaw sensitive affairs, imperial finances, court appointments, and even intelligence operations. With no families of their own and no threat of building rival dynasties, they were seen as politically safe, a quality that allowed certain emperors to entrust them with astonishing authority. Some even influenced decisions regarding succession, guiding which prince would ascend the throne. But this power came at a dangerous price. The higher a eunuch climbed, the more enemies he attracted. Court officials despised their sway, resented their secrets, and often plotted their downfall. To rise as a eunuch required more than ambition. It demanded ruthlessness, silence, and the ability to read danger in every glance. They were both pawns and players trapped in a game few survived unscathed. In the cold, disciplined world of the Forbidden City, where romantic love was forbidden and human connection was tightly policed, some eunuchs quietly formed emotional partnerships with palace women. These relationships, often called vegetarian couples, were not based on physical intimacy, but on companionship, loyalty, and mutual survival. A eunuch might share a quiet bond with a maidservant, a concubine's attendant, or even a fellow palace worker. Together they built a fragile sanctuary amid the loneliness and fear. These partnerships offered what the system denied: a sense of belonging, a thread of warmth in an otherwise sterile existence. For eunuchs who were stripped of masculinity and identity, and for women in the harem who were isolated and often forgotten by the emperor, these quiet alliances were a way to reclaim humanity. They exchanged stories, shared tea, comforted each other during illness, and sometimes even pooled their meager earnings for the future. But even these small connections were risky. If discovered, they could be separated or worse. Yet many accepted the danger, believing that even a taste of closeness was worth the cost. In a palace built on protocol and silence, these vegetarian couples whispered of defiance, dignity, and the quiet need to be seen. By the twilight years of the Qing Dynasty, the once powerful presence of eunuchs within the Forbidden City began to wane. As modern reforms slowly reached the imperial court, many of their roles were absorbed by the expanding imperial household department, an emerging bureaucracy that aimed to professionalize palace operations. No longer the indispensable gatekeepers of imperial intimacy, eunuchs found themselves increasingly sidelined, their influence fading like the dynasty they served. Yet, even in decline, their numbers remained significant. By the early 20th century, roughly 2,000 eunuchs still lived within the palace walls, But public sentiment had soured. Once feared and revered, they were now viewed with suspicion and scorn. Accusations of theft, manipulation, and corruption multiplied. In a crumbling empire, plagued by famine and foreign invasion, eunuchs became convenient scapegoats for deeper systemic failures. Desperate poverty drove new generations of boys to choose castration, voluntarily clinging to the fading dream of security inside the Forbidden City. But that promise was dying. When the last Emperor Puyi was expelled from the palace in 1924, the eunuchs were expelled with him. The ancient system that had consumed their bodies and lives collapsed, leaving behind silence, shame, and the echoes of a vanished world. The story of the eunuchs of the Forbidden City ends not with a rebellion or a final act of defiance, but with quiet disappearance. In 1996, Sun Yaoting, the last known imperial eunuch, passed away in a small apartment in Beijing. His death marked the final breath of an institution that had endured for over 2,000 years. Sun had been castrated as a child, prepared to serve a dynasty that fell before he could fully enter its walls. He lived long enough to witness revolution, war, and the birth of a new China that had no place for men like him. With his passing, the curtain closed on a brutal, haunting tradition, one shaped by loyalty loss and the manipulation of the human body for political ends. The Forbidden City, now a museum, stands as a silent monument to that world. Its golden rooftops still gleam in the sun, but the footsteps of eunuchs no longer echo through its courtyards. Their legacy is complicated, woven with pain, sacrifice, and power. They were servants and statesmen, victims and conspirators. But above all, they were human. Forgotten by history for too long, their story demands to be remembered not for its cruelty alone, but for the cost of obedience in the shadow of empire. Thank you for walking with us through one of the most haunting and overlooked chapters in imperial history. The story of the eunuchs of the Forbidden City isn't just about power or pain. It's about what a society is willing to sacrifice in the name of order, control, and tradition. These men lived in silence, served in shadows, and vanished from history without ever truly being seen. Today, we remember them not as footnotes, but as human beings who carried the weight of an empire on scarred shoulders. If this story moved you, taught you something new, or made you think differently about history, please take a moment to support this channel. Hit the like button to help others discover these forgotten truths. Subscribe so you never miss another story like this, because history is full of hidden corners that deserve to be explored. And don't forget to share this video with someone who loves powerful, emotional, and unfiltered history. Your support keeps these stories alive.